Yeah, if you've been given the expectation that you're supposed to be like this big thing, right, and do all of this powerful stuff, it feels like it should be in your control.
Mm-hmm.
Like saving the planet should be in my control because that's what I've been told I'm supposed to do. But being able to identify what's actually in our control versus what quote unquote should be in our control, I think those are all the lessons of growing up.
Welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
So, Antonia, we got a book for Piper a little bit ago. She's 12 years old at the time of this recording. It's called 13 Things Strong Kids Do. It's by Amy Morin, M-O-R-I-N. It's a fantastic book. And as I'm going through it with our daughter, as we're reading through some of this stuff isn't just for kids. Some of these ideas could apply to adults. Like any human, this is good advice in here.
Yeah.
And I thought, this is some good stuff. I want to kind of riff off a little bit of the principles that are coming up in this book on how to be a strong person or a strong personality, a strong person in your life. I think it could be useful for anybody, not just a child reading this or not just a kid like Piper.
Yeah, what I appreciated about this book is that the advice is actually solid personal development advice. It's written to be accessible to kids, which is great. But like you, I also thought that this was, if not the first time a person will have heard it, like a really good reminder that this is sort of the foundational principles to build strength upon. And I picked up the book up, I purchased the book for Piper because I liked the chapter, headings, and I liked the principles that they were going through. I also liked how there was examples in each chapter for kids, like playground examples or examples at school or whatever.
Yeah.
But I like the idea also of doing almost like a self-audit around it. Going through all 13 of these principles and going, where do I think that I'm at on this? It's been helpful to me.
So then on this show, let's dive into some of the concepts and pull them out and contextualize them for the person that's listening or watching right now.
Right.
And let's just go through it. Let's just go into it, and we'll probably come up with some ideas as we go. I mean, we've got some thinking already, but our intuition's going to make some connections. And as you're listening along, be hearing for how you can connect these things to your own life, your own personality type, right? What does this mean for you?
Doing an adult audit of child's advice.
One of the things the book opens up with is the idea of not feeling sorry for yourself. I struggle with this all the time. I'm sure somebody listening right now, I don't know if you struggle with this, Antonia. I tend to feel sorry for myself a lot. And I think it's a way to deal with disappointment for me. I think it's like when I deal with disappointment, one of the easiest ways than to just grieve the disappointment is to kind of feel self-sorry, like, oh, I got the wrong end of this, or maybe I should have done something different, or like feeling sorry for myself somehow covers over the feeling of disappointment in my life.
Yeah, I think that 100% of people get into this mode at certain times. And to define feeling sorry for yourself, I think is important to not conflate it with self-sympathy, because I think we should be self-sympathetic. And in fact, one of the principles later talks a little bit about self-compassion.
Yeah.
So it's not when we sympathize with ourselves going through a hard time. Feeling sorry for ourselves is more like when we're focused on the negative and we see the universe is out to get us. And we believe that we somehow, like, our problems are worse than everybody else's problems.
We're a victim.
Right. Exactly.
It's a victim mentality.
Yep. And so feeling sorry for yourself is, it's something that I think everybody falls into. It's just a matter of recognizing it, that it's not self-sympathy. It's not just like identifying with yourself and going like, no, but I do have a difficult time of it. When I have a difficult time, I absolutely acknowledge it. In fact, I'll tell everybody, right? I'll be like, I'm going through a really hard time. But that's different than almost getting into a mode of you're always going through a difficult time.
So this is something people struggle with, this idea of a victim mentality, or that things are happening to me. I think Tony Robbins talks about this idea of like, stop seeing things happening to you, start seeing things happening for you on your behalf. So I think that's a really great reframe. Like, you can shift your mentality here. But let's also come up and let's talk a little bit about some practical things we can do if we are feeling sorry for ourselves. Like, if I'm having that moment, what can I do no matter what my personality type is? Now, my type might influence how I do it.
Right.
But what is the principle behind what I need to do to stop that?
Right. Well, I think what you talked about, the perspective shift that things aren't happening to me, they're happening for me, is a good one.
Yeah.
In the book, she recommends focusing on what you can control as opposed to things you can't. So if you're always focused on the things you can't control and those things end up also being negative, then you really will feel like the universe is out to get you. But if you focus on the things you can control and have a sense of like, oh, well, I can change those things. As a person who subscribes to systems thinking, sometimes just one or two things that we change or alter or shift, even if they don't seem like they have a direct relationship to the thing that we don't like, sometimes they have a systemic relationship, like they're a node in a system. And so when you focus on the things you can change and alter those things, sometimes they have like a massive impact on the thing that you're not super happy about.
Yeah.
And then the other is to focus on gratitude, to be thankful for what you have as opposed to focusing on what you don't have.
Yeah.
And I recently had a situation like that because in our business, like we've gone through lean times and flush times, and we've gone through time periods that were more difficult than others. And I remember recently when we went through a pretty rough, period where, we're barely, sometimes we don't pay ourselves. Like if we're in a situation where things are, like it's a strain. COVID was a big example of this because we're a live event company. So COVID was very difficult on us. And, live events are like, or at least at the time, were 75% of our annual income. And 2020 and 2021 just kind of stripped that. So there were time periods where we weren't really paying ourselves. In fact, we were paying to keep the company alive. And I remember feeling like, why am I doing this? Why am I working so hard? I'm not getting any money. I don't, and at that time period, I was like, I'm not getting any credibility. And I'm just, why am I doing this? And then I looked around at the context that I was living in. I have a partner who I love and loves me. I have healthy children who are, good kids.
Yeah.
I have a home that would be a palace in a lot of other contexts, right? And I've visited people whose homes were like, very, very small and just really shelters. And I'm like, what am I complaining about? What do I mean I don't have anything? Like, I'm not getting anything for this. I have a whole life here.
Yeah.
So I reframed to focus on the positive, and all of a sudden it was like, well, actually, I'm doing pretty well. Whether or not my business is doing well, I'm doing well, and I need to focus on that piece.
Yeah.
So a part of not feeling sorry for yourself is to stop attuning to the challenges exclusively, and to start focusing on the things that are going right in your life.
Yeah. What I hear is it's hard for gratitude and a feeling of sorry for yourself to to occupy the same space.
Right.
So one of the ways to bust through it is to tune into that gratitude, realize the blessings you have, the positive things. If you do this, if you start to reflect on that and get away from feeling sorry for yourself, I think it sets you up for the next principle, which is to empower yourself. So what's nice about when you stop feeling sorry for yourself, you start to reframe to go, oh, things aren't happening to me. I'm actually the creator of my existence. I have a lot more power in my life to create the world I want. I can empower myself. I can actually be the initiator and the change agent in my life. I don't have to wait for something to change out here. That's a huge shift and reframe. If you want to find yourself as a powerful person, being able to empower yourself is key.
Yeah. And so that's the second principle, right?
Yeah.
Like that kids who are powerful, and in this case, we're going to say adults as well, they empower themselves. And the opposite of that would be to give your power away.
Yes.
So how do you give your power away? Well, you do it by being overly concerned about other people's opinion of you. Not that we're not going to care about other people's opinion. In fact, I believe we should.
Yes.
That's what we've talked about in other podcasts is persona work, right? Like how we show up in the world is important, how we interface. But to give our power away means that we are taking other people's opinion of us as the only thing that matters, as opposed to our own opinion of ourselves.
Yeah. So this would show up in things like perfectionism. If you're a person that struggles with perfectionism, you probably care too much about what other people think, and you're worried that they're going to think lowly of you or badly of you. I think poor boundaries is this, right? Yep. If you struggle with, communicating clear boundaries to people in your life, you're not empowering yourself. You're actually giving yourself low power because they're able to infringe upon these boundaries you haven't even articulated to yourself or others.
Yeah.
And now you can start to feel like, oh man, and you go back to feeling sorry for yourself, right? These things to build on each other.
Yep.
So if you are handing your power over to others, it's going to show up in a myriad of ways depending on your personality type. And each type has a flavor of how they'll interpret this and it'll look for them.
Yeah.
But often those are just two places we can look, right? Codependency is another one. I think there's a lot of ways that we worry what the other will think or do. And so bringing it back onto our, empowering from the self is really important.
Yeah. Remembering that nobody can make you feel anything without your consent.
Yeah.
In our empowered program for INFJs and INFPs, Annie Lala, who is one of our speakers, one of the people who teaches a session, she says that she calls it swallowing a knife. Like when a person presents an insult to you or an opinion, they're presenting you with something.
You have to accept that.
But you have to accept it,
Yeah.
right? And then if it's a negative opinion, that it feels like a knife that's going to stab you, but you actually have to take it and then you have to swallow it. And so she calls it swallowing a knife. And nobody can make you swallow a knife, right? Like you're doing that action after they've given you the criticism. You are going, okay, and now I'm going to take it in and let it do damage.
And if you don't identify with this, there are things people could say to you that just wouldn't offend you.
Mm-hmm.
You would just shrug them off.
Yes.
And so that tells me that it requires you to accept the criticism for it to have effect. Because as you're listening or watching right now, there's things that I could say to you, you're like, yeah, I don't care about that.
Yes.
Even if it's a criticism.
Yep.
Critique.
You got it. So the solution is, and I think you touched on it, is to set those healthy boundaries.
Yeah.
Protect your feelings, protect your energy, set healthy boundaries. And remember that if you allow people's opinion of you to have a debilitating effect, then half of that interaction was you taking it on.
Yeah. So you mentioned persona work and your persona, how you show up to the world. I think that dips into the next principle, which is adapting to change. Mm-hmm. And what it means to adapt to change, I think, is to have a really dialed in, fleshed out persona. So we might want to define what that means. What is a persona? How do we have a defined persona? What does that mean to have a flexible persona or a adaptable persona? It doesn't mean changing your core identity. Like adapt to change doesn't mean become a chameleon and just become a different person and have different values and interests based on who you're hanging around. That's not what we mean by adapt to change. It's being flexible. We all know the person. Like there's a person in your life right now as you're listening or watching, they're one note. They can't adapt to change. In fact, if you pull them out of the context they're familiar with, they fall apart. They probably wouldn't even go out of that context, first of all. My ex-mother-in-law was like this. Like she wouldn't do anything social because she couldn't control the frame once she left. She was just in this one note. She only lived in this one small slice of life, never left it. And everybody that interacted with her had to adapt to her. She couldn't adapt and she suffered a lot from it. Mm-hmm. So maybe this is you if you're listening or watching, but you definitely know somebody that's like this. And it doesn't mean that she needed to become a different person, like identity level. It just meant that she needed to shift the persona she was presenting to the world.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the reasons why people struggle with that is, whether or not we've been told this or whether or not we figured this out, when we get out of our comfort zone, that's when we grow. And that's a nice, sort of motto.
Platitude.
Yeah, exactly. It's a platitude. All growth happens out of our comfort zone, but growth is almost always painful.
Yeah.
Like that's the problem with growth, is that it hurts oftentimes. And so in order to be a powerful person, you have to be willing to take the growing pains that comes with, getting out of your comfort zone. But what's nice is that once you've grown, you don't have to feel those pains ever again. Like my legs don't hurt from growing pains as an adult because that work already happened as a child and my legs are not growing anymore.
Yeah.
And so the same happens when you learn to be flexible and adaptable, is that in the beginning, it almost always hurts. But eventually you get to a place where adaptability in and of itself is no longer quote unquote growth. It's like, that's just how you do things.
So I do want to define persona because we did promise that. And I would just say this, and you could add some more definition to it too, Antonia. I don't want to, were you complete with your thought? I don't want to hijack your thought.
Yeah. No, I didn't realize you had thrown it to me to define persona.
Well, I hadn't. I just said we do need to define it.
Okay.
I just want to make sure we land that. So somebody's like, well, I'm waiting for that definition before I can hear what else you got to say. So just make sure I insert that. The persona is the slice of you show the world, right? It comes from the old Greek plays, like dramas they would put on, where they would wear masks. And these masks were designed to amplify both voice and expression. So somebody in the very back of the theater could hear the actor And also they could see an over-exaggerated expression of sadness or happiness because they're so far away. You're not watching like a TV screen or something. You have to be able to see from a very far distance what the expression of that emotion is. So it's to be oversimplified and more amplified.
Right.
So amplified and simplified. Often our persona can do this for us.
Yeah.
Right. When I show up to a business meeting, I carry the persona of a business professional. I might have a business card with me. I might dress a certain way. I'm amplifying the business part of me, and I'm showing the world the business part of me. Like I might be in a suit and tie. I might have a business card. I might have nice shoes on. I might drive up, early for the engagement. I'm on time or early, right? All these things are markers of the slice of life I want to show this interaction. This is me in my business mode. It doesn't mean I've chameleoned myself into a different person. I still have my same core values and interests, but this is appropriate for me to show up here. If I go to the beach, I might wear a bathing suit. It's appropriate to show up in that context, right? But not at a business meeting. So this is what we mean by persona.
Yeah.
And there's a whole bunch of Jungian thought around this. I mean, we could go way deeper, but that's the basic building blocks of what persona means.
Yeah, I think we did a whole podcast on, or at least went on the Jungian archetypes, including persona. And I would agree. I think if we're going to marry this concept of, these habits along with personality advice, adaptability and flexibility absolutely dip into our persona. Our ability to stay essentially the same person while we interface with some flexibility in these different contexts. And that only happens through experience. We understand how to do that. We understand how to bring a different aspect of ourselves to a situation without it feeling fake. I think that's really what it is, because we almost always do that. We show up, it's like if you're at the opera, you're not going to wear a swimsuit. And we all know that. And there can sometimes be kind of like a bit of an attitude around like, well, I don't, then people at the opera are being fake or something. But it's like, no, it's just you get there and everybody else is dressed up and you're like, maybe I should be dressed up too. Maybe that's what's going on here. And that doesn't mean that you're playing at something.
Yeah.
If you're not an opera gown wearing person every day, it means that you are finding a way to match your core self to the situation while also meeting the world halfway. And so the more we do that, the more adaptable we become and the less overwhelming new things feel.
Yeah.
Which is one of the pieces of advice in the book, is to chunk things down and not feel so overwhelmed by them. And I think when it comes to adaptability and flexibility and even persona work, I think chunking things down, making them a little bit more manageable, not allowing overwhelm to spook us and go, oh, I guess I don't do new things anymore, or I can't change. Just allowing ourselves to kind of slowly worm our way into it, I think is, I think even adults can use that advice.
So this takes us to the next principle. And I think a lot of people struggle with this one. So I'm going to read a little different than what she's written here. I think the next principle is localizing things for yourself. What I mean by that, and you're listening right now, there's a whole generation, by the way, the millennial generation was raised and taught that they were going to be superheroes. And the world was depending on them to save us all. Like, if you grow up, little Johnny, little Susie, whoever, you have to grow up, become an adult, and you have to basically take the reins of this world and fix all the problems from the past and help us get to the next level. And it's all riding on you and your generation. Please don't screw this up. This is the message that young people are getting.
You can be anything you want.
That's right.
And you have to save the planet.
Yes. Okay. And so that's a lot of burden, a lot of pressure. So what I find with many of our clients and the people we work with when we're doing our coaching, our personality life path mentorship, even our profiler training course, and not just young people our age and older will do this too. They attempt to solve the challenges that they're facing by trying to fix all those challenges in the world, hoping that someday it'll boomerang back to them and solve it for themselves. And so the principle here is focus on what you can control. What do you have control over in your life? What are you actually able to affect? If you're out there trying to, let's say you've got some trauma or something that happened to you that was really bad in your life. Now, your message can be your message, right? The thing that was bad in your life, was challenging for you. You do want to often help solve it in the world or contribute in some way. But if you expect that to solve it for you, like fix it for yourself first, then take it to the world. But if you're solving it for the world first, assuming that eventually it'll come back to you, I think you're going to have a lot of suffering in life. It's going to take a long time if it ever happens at all. It probably won't happen. because it's so big. It's so out of your control. How are you going to fix the world before you even attune to the self?
Well, and I think that, excuse me, requires the skill of being able to identify what is in your control.
Yes.
Because if you've been basically programmed from childhood, which you were referring to the millennial generation, but I think a lot of people have been programmed from childhood that they have these expectations of them. These
you and I did.
Yeah, these high expectations. Yeah, absolutely.
Religious expectations for us.
That's right.
What we're going to do to save the world.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. Yeah. And when you have these high expectations, you're given the message that more is in your control and power than whatever's localized. Like you just mentioned, I like how you said that, like sort of pay attention to to what actually is local.
Yeah.
If
your own backyard.
Yeah. If you've been given the expectation that you're supposed to be like this big thing, right, and do all of this powerful stuff, it feels like it should be in your control.
Mm-hmm.
Like saving the planet should be in my control because that's what I've been told I'm supposed to do. But being able to identify what's actually in our control versus what quote unquote should be in our control, I think those are all the lessons of growing up. Oh, I actually can't save the world, but I can say, if it's important to me, I can recycle, right? I can recycle. It doesn't mean that it's necessarily changing anything, but I can do that as a statement to myself. And I think actually even more so is, I can actually control my feelings.
Yeah.
I can control my thoughts. Maybe not immediately, maybe not in the moment, but over time I can start to work on myself so that my responses to things are different than they were earlier. I can do that work.
Yeah.
I can't say control other people's opinions, and I can't control other people's feelings, and I can't control how other people behave, but I can control those things on my side.
Yeah.
So that's really what it means to, I think, sort of localize all of that and focus on what you can control as opposed to what you can't. And then one of the best gifts you can give to yourself is to become a really good problem solver.
Yeah.
And so you can control more things if you have the capacity, if like you have the skill to do it. So you might not be able to get everybody in town to, and I'm just using the recycle thing because I know that that's what millennials got a ton of. Like, make sure you save the planet, save the planet.
I was thinking save the world socially and politically, but yes, the planet itself also. When I see the planet, I mean the world, like all levels. For sure, but I just remember all the propaganda about making sure you save the planet. And so, and that's a more neutral topic, so I'm going to go to that one. Sure.
But there's you might not be able to get everybody in your town to be, I don't know, environmentally, responsible. But if you build the skill of public speaking and leadership, you might be able to get a group of people and create a tipping point of that.
Yeah.
So building skills becomes your best friend when it comes to focusing on the things you can control, because the better your skill, the more you can control.
Yes. And so that takes us to our next principle. I had, I think a boss one time tell me, you're going to have more success with the things you say no to than the things you say yes to. There's a ton of things you can say yes to in this life, but really what you say no to is going to be important because it's going to curate the very things you say yes to. And so as we talk about this, having self-discipline to get good at saying no more to things, like not all the options on the table. This is a big lesson for me. I'm preaching the choir here. I want to do all of it in a lifetime. I'm not going to have enough time to do all of it. And so I have to say no to some things, and not everything's a good option. If all options are good, no options are good. So getting really judicious about saying no at key moments, and particularly like just what we're talking about. Saying no to, what? And sometimes it's on a timeline. It's not even holistic no. It's like, no, I'm not going to save the world right now, socially, politically, environmentally. I'm actually going to save myself. I'm going to work on myself for a period of time. And then I maybe can say yes to that later. But right now I'm going to say no. I'm going to create distinction around what I'm actually focusing on. So I'm not focusing on that. I'm not focusing on that. I'm focusing here.
Yes.
And it's key. It's really important to know what to say no to.
This is such an important thing. If you can learn this young, you've got such an advantage. I can't tell you how many of my coaching clients, this is one of their major core issues, is learning when to say no, because they have been programmed. We've all been programmed to say yes to so many things, but that's not to opportunities. When people say yes to things more, what they're talking about is opportunities. And when we say learn when to say no, we're talking about burdens. We're talking about carrying, doing things in behalf of others that aren't necessarily in your own best interest.
Yeah. Well, to say yes to opportunities, sometimes you have to say no. So the other night, our daughter, Piper, she's like 12 this time recording. It's like 10 o'clock at night. She's supposed to be getting ready for bed. It's a school night. And it starts pouring down rain. And she comes down in a pair of shorts and a t-shirt, and she opens the front door. I'm like, where are you going? She's like, to go play in the rain. And it was like warm out, right? Because the time of this recording, it's like late summer. And I'm like, we're playing in the rain. And she like runs out in the rain, and she's like running around in this like rain downpour. It's warm rain, and she's having a blast. And I'm watching her do this. And immediately she's like, come out with me, Dad. And immediately I'm like saying no to myself, like not to go out. And then I'm like, no, I'm going to say no to that part of me.
Mm-hmm.
Heck no. Shut up. Sit down. I'm actually going to say no to the part of me that doesn't want to get wet, that doesn't want to get messy. And I'm going to go out there and play with her. So I quickly ran upstairs, changed, and ran out with her into the rain and had a great time, right? It was a little cold, but I was fine. Made it through. But sometimes saying no is saying yes in a way. Because you know, like it's like a top 10 list is valuable for what's not on the top 10 list. Mm-hmm. So the things we say no to actually say yes to other things, mm-hmm. right? So it's actually a mode of saying yes in a way.
It is. Saying no is saying yes to more important things. And here's the key. The key is to do so without feeling guilt. That's the hardest part. The hardest part is saying no and sticking up for yourself, really being assertive and advocating for yourself. And then afterwards, not sitting with this terrible guilt. So that's how you know you're making progress in this area, is not just your ability to say no, it's your ability to say no and not feel guilty about it. There are times when saying no is the healthiest option. So why would you feel guilty about doing something that's healthy? So it's a matter of like identifying when saying no is healthy and then working through the guilt. And one of the best ways to work through guilt isn't to go, oh gosh, I feel guilty, so now I'm going to like jump in and do it anyway. Or feel like the guilt is punishing you for having said no, even though saying no is in your own best interest is the best thing to do. It's sitting with it. You process an emotion by sitting with it and experiencing it and feeling it and then inquiring about it. Why am I feeling guilty? What programmed me to feel guilty? Is this guilt warranted in this situation? And so when you get to the other side and then you say no the next time, oftentimes if you fully process the guilt for the first time you did it, then the next time you might still feel guilt, but it'll be a little less. And then the next time it's a little less and a little less that, each consecutive time. And eventually you can say no without feeling guilty at all. And that's the goal. The goal is to stand up for yourself, to be assertive, and then not punish yourself for having done the right thing. Yeah. And then remembering it's saying yes to more important things.
So as you talk about sitting with a feeling of guilt and just riding it to the other side, that's really an uncomfortable place to be. You know, you mentioned getting out of your comfort zone earlier when we talked about one of the first core principles. The next principle here is written out to say, take calculated risks. But really what the person's saying is get out of your comfort zone. Anything that's amazing in your life that's going to happen is probably going to be a little, you would interpret as risky for the self, right? You're going to think it's like a little risky, not risky, like unsafe, but uncomfortable risky. Like approaching that person you're attracted to and striking up a conversation, right? There's some calculated risk. It's going to further your life. If you have a good interaction with that person and it kicks off something romantic, well, good. Or a friend, maybe you don't know how they're going to take something and now there's a friendship from it. You walked up to them and initiated something. Like life is about risk and getting out of our comfort zones in order to further things. And sometimes we don't know how it's going to go. We're going to roll the dice and it may not go well and we have to risk it anyway, particularly when it comes to like social and human things, right? When there's not really a safety risk at stake, it's more reputation, or we worry we're going to be seen in a bad light. I think those things we can amp up, particularly those things, we can amp up our risk factor a lot more than we are now as humans.
Yeah, I think it's the only way to build self-confidence. I think taking calculated risks is the only way to watch yourself. Well, I guess you can also build self-confidence when life just hits you with things that are hard. So, but if we take calculated risks and we put ourselves in hard situations and maybe even things that we're afraid of.
Yeah.
Recognizing that fear is totally normal, right? Anytime we're taking a risk, fear is a part of what comes along with it. Then we're able to watch ourselves overcome obstacles and then take an accounting of it. And so taking calculated risks is one of the best ways for us to build self-confidence proactively, as opposed to waiting for life to hit us with a hard situation that we have to struggle and sort of survive and then responsively build self-confidence. Either way is fine. Self-confidence is always a win. But calculated risks are our only way to build it on our terms.
I think calculated risks, yes, on our terms, and also the things we desire. Like life might circumstantially bring things to us, right? You might go to college and happenstance run into the person that you want to be with for the rest of your life, or you might go to some party and run into, like things might just happenstance. But if you're like, hey, I want to partner up. I want to find somebody in life. I want to find somebody that vibes with me. Well, you have to risk. You have to put yourself out there. You have to go on dates. You got to approach people, talk to people. Like it's risky. You could get rejected. And so the proactivity of life is going to require risk. Now, but what you're talking about is life might just give you opportunities to be responsive or reactive to it, particularly responsive. And you might grow that way. There might be some growth that happens, but it's kind of like throwing a handful of like flowers in a random place in the ground. Like you can't curate that. But if I plant things in a garden and I'm watering it and I'm protecting it from pests, and I'm fertilizing it, now I can curate how that grows. And risk, if we're curating our life, risk is the fertilizer. It's the thing we have to do to grow, to stretch proactively.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's getting good at weighing pros and cons. It's getting good at recognizing what's a risk that's within my capacity. It's not too far outside of my capacity, but it still is a stretch. So you're looking for opportunities that allow you to still feel a little bit of fear, but won't, like if it doesn't work out, it's not going to destroy you, obviously. Yes. And so you're looking for things that hit that sweet spot.
Yeah.
And like you said, it's easy for us to just kind of like life guide us, sort of just be sort of going down the river of life, and it just takes us wherever it wants to take us. And sometimes it's an okay place and sometimes it's a terrible place. And when we take calculated risks and build self-confidence through that mechanism, then when life hits us really hard, we'll have already shored ourselves up a little bit. We're like, okay, but I'm already used to a feeling of some fear and realizing it doesn't have to stop me. And I've already like done some things that I didn't think I was going to be able to do. So when we get a true tragedy or a major challenge thrown our direction, we're like, we've already got some of that under our belt because we proactively built it.
Well, and we're talking about the future. We're talking about moving into the future, which really brings us to our next key principle, which is strong people, strong personalities create their own future. And what does that mean? Well, future is obviously in, forward. It's the future moment. It's in front of us. We haven't gotten there yet. It's expectantly coming for us. But create indicates that I'm going to do something now, in the here and now, to make that future inevitable.
Right.
So if we start to think in terms of, oh, wait a minute, I don't have to just wait for the future to get to me. I can start to do things now that are going to create the outcome that I want as the future comes toward me. So that I don't have to just accept whatever future comes. Like we were just talking about that kind of reactive or responsive mode. It's by taking risks and putting myself out there. I'm creating my future right now.
Yeah.
Every day, my future self is going to live with the results of what I do here. What did I create today? If I go do healthy habits, Atomic Habits, James Clear talks about this, right? Like my habits are going to dictate my future. And so I have to have good habits today. I can start to create my future right now in the present moment.
Yeah. I actually heard a quote from a friend today that said the best way to plan for the future is to create it.
Yeah.
And you can't do that completely. Again, we're talking about the only thing we can really control is ourselves.
Yeah.
So we can't 100% control the future, obviously, but we can control ourselves, our reactions, our responses, our ability to see opportunities, to navigate well, to build some self-confidence so that when something kind of feels a little scary, but is a good thing for us, we can still jump on it, those opportunities. And start to, to not see that, it's kind of the opposite of feeling sorry for ourselves and experiencing everything as something out to get us.
Yeah.
It's a matter of being optimistic about what future possibilities are in front of us and feeling, positive about it and thinking like, if I do the right things now, doing the right things does not mean that you'll always have the right conclusion.
That's right.
Like, what does Captain Picard say? That is life, right? You can do all the right things and it still turns out poorly. But that's not predictive. It's not like you do all the right things and it usually ends up wrong. You do all the right things and oftentimes the conclusion will follow the process. So feeling like a sense of empowerment about our future is super important.
Yeah. Well, and it also keeps it in the realm of now.
Mm-hmm.
I can be creative now, even if I got to this place and it wasn't the future I wanted, well, I go back to creation. What can I do now to, again, change the future outcome that I'm going toward?
Yep.
So it's a continual calibration process, I think, of updating, which really leads to another part. As you move through life and you didn't get to the future you wanted, you could look back on it and punish yourself.
Right.
You could be like, wow, I made mistakes there. I got where I didn't want to go. I didn't like my outcome. I messed up. I have a big struggle with this personally. Like, I tend to beat myself up about mistakes. And in a way, so the next principle is owning your mistakes. In a way, by beating myself up for those mistakes and really getting on my case, I'm not really owning them. I'm registering them and I'm weaponizing them.
Ooh.
But owning my mistakes means I'm taking responsibility for them and I'm doing something about it.
What a fabulous distinction.
Right? I'm not just bitching.
Oh my gosh, that is such a great distinction, that there's a difference between beating yourself up for your mistakes and owning your mistakes.
That's right. But a lot of people say, well, I'm just owning it. I didn't do that right. It's like, that's an easy get out of jail free card.
Yeah.
But it's to say, I didn't do that right. Here's what I could have done better calibratively. Next time I'm going to do enter behavior change, right? I learned from my mistake means I'm going to change my behavior next time.
Yep.
Not, I'm going to do the same thing and the world needs to change so that mistake doesn't happen next.
Yeah. Well,
which is what I think a lot of, I certainly want that often in my life. I think a lot of us do.
And that's not, like, beating yourself up for your mistakes is not true reflection. Because if you're doing true reflection and you're faithfully recalling how everything went down, you'll also see all the positive things you did.
Yes.
You'll see the good things. You'll actually have a good diagnostic between why the mistake happened.
Yeah.
Versus, like I actually did quite a few things right, but it was this thing that I did wrong.
Yes.
As opposed to just beating yourself up. You can't actually be a faithful narrator of your past because you're just going to see the negative. So I think that's a fabulous distinction.
Which is great, because if you start to tune into the positives as well, you're also going to get more gentle and more positive toward other people.
Yes.
So you're not going to just criticize them for their mistake. In fact, you're going to see their successes, which brings us to our next principle, which is celebrate other people's successes and bless them, because what you celebrate and bless will come back to you in your life, right? So if I'm going through the world and I see somebody do something amazing, even if it's not the topic I love, but I'm like, whoa, that's so cool. I'm so encouraged by your story or what you're doing, and I bless it. Well, that starts to wire something in me to look for the things I love in me and the things I do and the things I want to bless for myself. So
Yes.
I'm celebrating others. It's a way of celebrating for myself too. And plus it's helping other people. You're contributing to them. And isn't it wonderful to be celebrated for the things we do? You would love it.
Well, and there's a thought that the book presents, which I thought was so good, which is that other people's successes don't take away your potential. And that's a really important turn of phrase, I think, or way of seeing it.
It's not a zero-sum game.
That's right. And in a situation where somebody won and you lost, I think you can still grieve your loss. You can still grieve that you didn't, that, and then own your mistakes and blah, 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 blah. But realizing that that's not the end of your story, you still have potential. And in fact, your potential could be that the next game you play with this person, you win and they lose. Or if you own your mistakes and realize why you lost in that situation, if it's not simply that you're totally outclassed. Even if you are, though, it doesn't rob you of your future playing, right? It doesn't rob you of your potential. And so as opposed to saying like, it was a humiliation, I lost, it was terrible, and then just be stuck in that one moment.
Yeah.
Go celebrating the person's win. Like you said, it's celebrating yourself, but it's also remembering that you've got more in you later. They didn't just once and for all time seal this opinion of you and your capacity.
Yeah.
You've still got more in you later. So keep that in mind as you are, as you're celebrating their win so that they'll celebrate your win.
Absolutely. Which leads us to our next principle, which is if you fail, try again. And so by focusing in on those successes, so you're owning your mistakes, and ownership means actually doing something to correct behavior. You're celebrating other people's successes. This gives you the fuel and the motivation to pick yourself back up when those failures happen and trying something again, because that is a character trait of strong people, right? Strong personalities are going to get up, they get knocked down, they're going to say, that doesn't stop me. Yeah. It's got to take a lot more to stop me than that, and they get right back up and they try it again.
Yeah, persistence.
Persistence is so important.
Right. And persistence resilience, and problem-solving abilities. That's what falls under this category. If you can persist when things get tough. I mean, I think I've always been under the assumption that if something just really the ROI is not there, it's just better to cut your losses. And so I have actually been a person who at a certain point will be like, okay, it's officially, like I've hit an event horizon and it's officially better to stop. But those situations are surprisingly rare. Most situations, most of them do better when you're persistent. Most of them do. Sometimes, especially like sometimes relationships. Now, I would say be persistent in particularly a marriage, right? When you've committed to somebody, you've said vows, it's always better to try as long as humanly possible, in my opinion. And I say that as somebody who's gone through a divorce, right? So I think it's important to do everything you can to pour into the relationship. And there are times when you just can't control another person. Maybe they violated a boundary that is something you can't get over. Like there are situations when it's time to call it quits. So I think persisting when things are tough is not a case of keep doing things and beating yourself in the head when it's just clear that this is the wrong thing to do. But there's an important distinction between that and giving up when it's tough. Giving up when it's tough, it's like there's still potential there. There's still possibility. And it's just a rough patch, right? It's like, and getting to the other side, oh, it's such a sweet feeling to get to the other side of a difficult challenge, a rough patch. And again, what lives on the other side is self-confidence waiting for you. Yeah. So problem-solving abilities, even like in a marriage, what's problem-solving in a marriage? Learning better communication, figuring out what the other person's needs are that are going unmet, figuring out what your needs are that are going unmet, right? Like solving the problem is a major piece of that. Yeah. And having a sense of resilience, right? Not just breaking at every, small thing. So I'm using relationships as the sort of the topic I've chosen on this one, but I think it applies to everything.
I think this is one of those things that not everybody's created equally around. Like much like risk tolerance, people have a threshold of how much risk they can handle for themselves. I think this idea of failing and trying again is a little bit of a sliding scale. Like each person has their own relationship to it. Mm-hmm. I have a high threshold for pushing through even painful or traumatic things. Right. A lot of people are like, that's terrible. Never do that. Like I would probably push through like really difficult stuff, but I've got a high threshold for it. I also get a lot of good results in my life. Yeah. So your threshold for being able to pick yourself back up and try again in the midst of failure, and your threshold for the ability to push yourself and persist in response to that. Again, you may not be equipped for the highest levels, but I think if you can push out and stretch yourself as much as you can, yes, that's the goal. And if it's just one deviation or one click beyond what you could handle last year, that's good.
Yeah, I don't have I don't have the same amount of push through that you do. I know that. I already know that. I already know that. Like, I think I do too much math. I'm like, this hurts a lot, and I don't think I'm going to get the ROI out of it. So I think I'm going to bounce. Yeah. But I agree with the statement that you do as much as you can. Yeah. And push further than you think you can go. Yeah. In terms of making it through tough time periods. And sometimes it's just it's like you've actually truly hit a limitation. Yeah. But do everything you can.
So I'm going to end with something I want to say about this. All these things I'm going to tie up in a minute here, a couple minutes once we land the plane. I think I got a way to wrap that up with a statement. Okay. The other principle here in the next thing is balancing social time with alone time. Mm-hmm. Now, immediately someone's going to hear that and go, that's right. All this socialization, we need more alone time in the world. But I'm also talking to you introverts that have too much alone time. Mm-hmm. Your balance is going to be the other direction. Right? The balance of social time and alone time isn't just people that are social need to get more alone time. People that spend too much time by themselves also need to get out there and be more social. So it's going to be different for every person. What is the balance? How do you balance the scale? And it's not maybe a 50-50. Mm-hmm. Like, introvert's not going to be 50% out there all the time and 50% at home. Probably going to be still skewing to stay home and chilling and not being out in like a social frame. But you probably can increase capacity. If you're an extrovert like myself, go, don't slow down to tune into the self and get quiet, probably could add a little bit more alone time. It's probably not going to be 50-50, but I can have more capacity for alone time in my life.
Mm-hmm.
So it depends on the person. I would say probably for you, Antonia, you definitely crave a lot of alone time these days.
I do more than you do. I'm not as social as you are.
Yeah.
I don't think. But I think that there have been hermit time periods in my life that I needed a lot more socialization or socializing rather. And and it was unhealthy for me to not have it. And there have been times when I've been incredibly social and I needed a lot more alone time. So I think finding that balance is important. And I think that's where type comes in to help us understand what's the healthiest balance for us. If we lead with an introverted function,
Yeah.
we probably need reminders to be a little bit more social. And if, like you said, if we're leading with an extroverted function, we probably need reminders to have more alone time. But the specific function or the specific functions that fall in there will also determine exactly how you should be socializing and how much time as well. Like my extroverted function is extroverted intuition. I don't need that much socializing. I need new experiences that fuel my ideas.
Yeah.
And my introverted function is introverted thinking, which only works best when I'm not socializing. So I'm going to be built to socialize less than you, but I still have those needs, right? Extroverted feeling or harmony is my 10-year-old tertiary, and that definitely needs socializing. So it helps me figure out what my right balance is for me. If I don't have it at all, I definitely have a part of me that has needs going unmet. If I do too much of it, it pulls me out of my ability to do really solid introverted thinking or accuracy work. And that's crucial for me. So even though I'm an extrovert, I would say that I don't need nearly as much socializing as a lot of other extroverts, but I still have that need and I need to keep my finger on the pulse of it.
Yeah. It's important to know where we start from so we're not fantasists.
Mm-hmm.
And so as we tune into the next principle, we balance the socialization part. It's important to remember and be grateful for what we have right now and where we're coming from and where we're starting from. This is the best way to approach life with both reality and possibility. Meaning I'm going to take an account, because when I'm complaining and I'm ungrateful, I'm not taking, there's this song when we were kids, like count your blessings, name them one by one. When I was a little kid, like I used to sing this song in like church or something. And it's so true. It's like, if you tune into the blessings of your life and the good things and the things you're grateful for, you're rooting in reality of what is. And you're not in your abstractions of what could be or the disappointments or all this theory. It brings you to the present moment, the here and now, the eternal now of right here, right now. Here's what I have and here's what I'm grateful for. I'm in good health. I can stand up. Yeah, but you could tune into really small things, right? I can stand up with my own power on my own 2 feet. Like that's something to be really grateful. Not everybody can do that, right? And I can, and so I'm grateful for that. And I think you can also be grateful for the things that aren't challenges in your life. Like I'm grateful that I don't have a major debilitating disease or challenges with my physicality. Both of my grateful and ungrateful, or things I'm grateful for happen to be about my physicality, because we often can start there. We have our bodies and we can tune into that first as a good starting place. But there's a bunch of other things I'm really grateful for. I'm grateful that I don't live in a country or an area with warfare. Just think about how awesome that is for me. There's other people, and you might be a person right now listening from a place that's war-torn right now, which is an incredible struggle. And I understand the struggle of that. So what are the things we can be grateful for? How do we ground ourselves in what is the here and now, the rooted reality we are starting from? And then we can want other things, but let's start with a reality frame first, not an abstraction of where we are in our lives.
What was this particular principle?
This is be grateful. They're thankful for what they have.
That's right. Yeah. Okay. So, as mentioned before, that the gratitude that helps reattune away from like victim mentality or feeling sorry for yourself. It's a reminder that I think, and while we do have our health, and while we aren't in a war-torn country or situation, things can change quickly.
Absolutely.
And so tapping into gratitude in the moment as a practice,
yes,
makes it so that if you are going through things like that, you can still have gratitude. And
it's a practice, not an outcome.
That's right. That's exactly it. It kind of doesn't matter what your situation or context is.
Something you do.
Gratitude is like a muscle you build.
Yes.
And it helps get through some really, really bad situations.
Yeah.
So practicing gratitude, no matter what your context or situation, and especially recognizing that things can change so quickly. I think it's if a person doesn't have a gratitude practice, right? Like you said, it's a practice, but there are disciplines around gratitude and actual daily practices around gratitude. I think they're game changers.
Yeah. Well, what we're talking about is being able to find gratitude no matter what's going on.
Right.
Like if you train yourself this way, if I can train myself to be grateful for whatever's going on in my life right now, even if it's 180 degrees to what's going on tomorrow, and then tomorrow I can do the same.
Yep.
That is a skill that will serve me no matter what's happening.
That's right. Yep.
And so what we're talking about is process.
Yes.
Not outcome.
Right.
Like figuring out how to be grateful in process, not grateful for a specific outcome, even though I might have desires and outcomes I want. Which takes us to our last principle, which we've actually already used this principle. You really harped on it when we got to the fail and try again.
Mm-hmm.
The final one is persistence that she writes in the book. And I want to tune to this idea of process that we talked about with gratitude, because I think persistence and I think everything gets wrapped up with this idea of process and progress, not perfection. So the statement I wanted to make earlier to kind of tie all this together, the final principle is progress, not perfection. That's what we're after. We're after as much as we can do, push yourself hard. I think that's what I would say, right? I want to push myself as much as I can, probably even beyond what I think I can handle, but do it for whatever your threshold is. But it's not about the outcomes you get. Yes, those are important, but continuing on the process and keep improving as you go and be more process focused than outcome focused, I think makes you a happier, stronger person and stronger personality personally. And that's how you persist.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And the idea that, well, what's the old phrase? What doesn't kill us makes us stronger.
Yeah.
There is some truth to old adages like that.
Yeah.
And so I think just to kind of wrap up, because I did go on about persistence a little bit. I might have shot the bullet a little too early on that one.
It's all right.
I'll just say, because I think we're concluding now that that this particular book is a great one, especially if you have young children. And sometimes we as adults need reminders of these things as well.
Yeah.
These are basic personal development principles, and they all, I think, need practice, right? They're all muscles that we build. And so we highly recommend it, especially if you have kids, to pick up a copy of it. It's called 13 Things Strong Kids Do. And it's written by Amy Morin, Morin. But it's also just good to remember these things as adults and to, practice a little bit of, like, as she talked about, this idea of like saying no. There's self-advocacy in there. There's self-compassion in there. So it's not all just pushing yourself to do hard things. It's also being your own best friend, being somebody who has your own back.
Your own advocate.
That's right.
You
Exactly.
advocate for yourself in a lot of ways.
Yeah, exactly. So you don't feel sorry for yourself because you don't have to,
Yep.
because you're already your own friend and you're already advocating for yourself in the world.
Yeah. So it's been myself and Antonia in this conversation. You've been listening or watching along. You haven't had a third microphone, but there's a way for us to hear from you. If you come over to personalityhacker.com, you can leave a comment, ask a question, or more importantly, just below this episode, share your story about what's coming up for you. Have you tuned into some of these principles? Do you consider yourself a strong personality? Somebody that's built themselves up into strength and you feel like you can handle a lot? What was that journey like? We'd love to hear the story. Come over and make your voice heard again over at personalityhacker.com. We want to hear from you.
That's right. And you can subscribe to this podcast if you enjoyed it. You can subscribe to it on Apple Podcasts, I believe. I always say iTunes, but it's not iTunes anymore. It's Apple Podcasts, or Spotify or other Android platforms. And if you leave us a rating and review on Apple iTunes, that helps me out a lot. It helps me feel like somebody's listening. And
we got a new one, I think yesterday, the day before, by the way.
Did we get a new one?
Yeah, you should check it out.
I'm always happy when we get a new one. So
it'll fuel you.
Feel free to leave one because I always enjoy them. You could be watching us on YouTube right now, our video podcast. If you enjoyed it, you can like, subscribe, and hit the bell to let you know when future episodes come out. And if you are in the mood to do a little personal development work to become the best version of your personality, you can build traits and characteristics like the ones we've talked about, but you can also do it in a very targeted way for yourself through the Personality Owner's Manual designed for your personality type. This goes into your specific cognition that you are wired in a very unique way based on your type preferences. And it goes through and helps you build some of these qualities and characteristics that we've been talking about through the lens of your specific type.
Yeah, it's really powerful to do personal growth or attune to these things from the lens of how you're uniquely wired.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting way to go through a personal development journey. Mm-hmm. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.